Hi, I'm Sarah. My brother threw my daughter's toys at her like they were missiles, yelling, "She plays like a pig!" Then he shoved her roughly to the floor. When my daughter looked up with tears in her eyes, my own brother just laughed. But what my father, a respected federal judge, did next? Let's just say even I didn't see that final gavel coming until the courtroom fell silent. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other Saturday in our small Vermont town, peaceful, with a gentle breeze stirring the maple trees outside my kitchen window. My daughter Mia was sprawled across the living room floor, her toys creating what looked like a miniature city. At 8 years old, she had an imagination that transformed plastic figurines into elaborate worlds with complex stories. I watched her from the kitchen as I prepared lunch, smiling at her sound effects and the different voices she created for each character. Being a single mother wasn't easy, but moments like these, seeing her completely absorbed in play, made everything worthwhile. The knock at the door came just as I was placing sandwiches on plates. 3 sharp raps that seemed to echo through our little 2-bedroom home. I wasn't expecting anyone, and a quick glance at my phone showed no missed calls or texts. "Coming!" I called, wiping my hands on a dish towel. When I opened the door, my brother David stood there, dressed impeccably as always in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, his expression already set in that familiar disapproving frown. "Surprise visit," he said, not waiting for an invitation before stepping inside. His eyes swept across our modest living room, lingering on Mia's sprawling toy landscape with undisguised disgust. "I see nothing's changed." I felt myself tensing. David and I had always had a complicated relationship. As the golden child who followed in our father's footsteps to become a corporate lawyer, he never missed an opportunity to remind me that my life choices, including my divorce and modest teaching career, were disappointments to the family name. "We weren't expecting company," I said, my voice deliberately light. "But you're welcome to join us for lunch." Mia looked up from her play, her initial excitement at seeing her uncle quickly fading when she caught his expression. "Hi, Uncle David," she said quietly, already beginning to gather her toys. "Don't bother," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "I can't stay long, I'm on my way to Dad's. He wants to discuss the family trust." The words hung in the air like a threat. Our father, Judge William Montgomery, controlled the substantial family fortune with an iron grip, doling out approval and financial support based on how well we adhered to his strict standards. David had always excelled at meeting those expectations. "You should have called first," I said, moving to help Mia collect her toys. "We could have cleaned up." David snorted. "Would it have made a difference? This place always looks like chaos." He stepped further into the room, his polished leather shoes stopping just short of a line of carefully arranged action figures. "Dad wants to see you, by the way. Says you haven't returned his calls." I had been avoiding my father's calls. Each conversation inevitably turned into a lecture about how I was raising Mia wrong, how I should have fought harder to make my marriage work, how I was squandering my potential teaching elementary school instead of pursuing law like he'd planned for me. "I've been busy," I said, gathering plates from the kitchen. "Mia, honey, can you please clear your toys so we can have lunch?" She nodded and began methodically putting her figurines into their storage bin, careful to keep them in the right order so she could resume her story later. I noticed David watching her with narrowed eyes, his foot tapping impatiently against the hardwood floor. "This is exactly what Dad means," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "No discipline, no structure, just chaos and excuses." I felt heat rise to my cheeks but held my tongue. Arguing with David never ended well, and I didn't want to upset Mia. She was already moving faster, sensing the tension in the room. "Uncle David, do you want to see the castle I built?" she asked hopefully, holding up an impressive structure made from building blocks and cardboard. It was her pride and joy, something she'd worked on for days. David barely glanced at it. "I don't have time for games. And honestly, Sarah, she's too old to be playing with this junk all day." She should be doing something productive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mia's face fell, and I felt that familiar mixture of hurt and anger bubble up inside me. Before I could respond, David's phone rang. He answered immediately, turning away to speak in hushed tones. Business. Always business. I knelt beside Mia, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Your castle is amazing," I whispered. "We'll have lunch as soon as Uncle David leaves, okay?" She nodded, but the light had gone out of her eyes. That was what hurt the most, watching my daughter's brightness dim whenever our family was around. They had a way of making her feel small, just as they'd always done to me. David ended his call and turned back to us with a sigh. "That was Dad. He wants me to bring you and Mia to dinner tonight." Non-negotiable, his words. My stomach tightened. "David, I don't think—" "It's not about what you think, Sarah," he cut in. "It's about family obligation. Dad is getting older, and he's making decisions about the future. If you want any say in that, you'll be there." The threat wasn't subtle. My teaching salary covered our basic needs, but there were months when things got tight, especially with Mia's medical expenses from her asthma. The family money would secure her future, provide for college, give her opportunities I couldn't on my own. "Fine," I relented. "What time?" 7. "And make sure she's presentable," he added, glancing at Mia in her play clothes. "Dad hates sloppiness." I bit back a retort. Mia was a child, not a doll to be dressed up for inspection. But I'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting. At least not in front of her. "We'll be there," I said, moving toward the door to show him out. David paused, looking around one more time. His gaze landed on Mia, who had returned to organizing her toys, placing each one carefully back into position. Something in his expression shifted, hardened. "This isn't normal, you know," he said, voice low but not low enough. "All this fantasy play. Kids need reality, structure. Dad's right to be concerned." Before I could stop him, he stepped forward, nudging Mia's carefully arranged toy city with his foot. Several figures toppled over. "Time to grow up, kiddo." Mia looked up, her lower lip trembling slightly. "I just need to finish my story." "Stories don't pay bills," David said, his voice taking on that lecturing tone he'd inherited from our father. "Real life isn't about playing make-believe all day." I stepped between them, my patience finally snapping. "That's enough, David. She's a child, and this is her home. You don't get to come in here and dictate how she plays." Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. That Montgomery temper we'd all inherited, but that I worked so hard to control. "This is exactly why Dad is worried. You're raising her in a fantasy world, Sarah. No boundaries, no respect for authority." As if to prove his point, he reached down and grabbed a handful of Mia's carefully arranged figures. Before either of us could react, he threw them across the room, the small plastic toys hitting the wall with a series of sharp cracks. "Uncle David!" Mia cried out, scrambling to retrieve her scattered toys. "David!" I shouted simultaneously, shock rendering me momentarily immobile. But he wasn't done. Something had snapped in him, some pent-up frustration finding its target in my daughter's innocent play. He snatched up more toys, the main characters from her story, the ones she treasured most, and began hurling them directly at her. "She plays like a pig!" he shouted, his face contorted with a rage that seemed wildly disproportionate. "Look at this mess. This is what happens when there's no discipline." One of the harder plastic figures struck Mia on the cheek, and she cried out, raising her hands to shield herself. I lunged forward, but David was already stepping toward her, his hand closing around her arm. "You need to learn respect," he growled, jerking her roughly to her feet and then shoving her away. She lost her balance, falling hard onto the floor, her small body crumpling amid the scattered ruins of her toy world. The room went silent, except for Mia's quiet sobs. David stood over her, breathing heavily, seeming almost surprised by his own actions. When he looked up at me, There was a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps, but it was quickly replaced by defiance. "She needs discipline," he said, straightening his shirt. "Dad's right about that." I found my voice then, cold and steady. "Get out of my house. Now." "Sarah, get out!" I screamed, my body shaking with a rage I rarely allowed myself to feel. "You don't touch my daughter, ever. Get out before I call the police." David's face hardened. "And tell them what? That I'm trying to teach some discipline to a spoiled brat? Dad will." "I don't care what Dad will do." I cut him off, moving to the phone. "One more word, David, and I'm calling 911. Judge's son or not, throwing objects at a child is assault." For a moment, I thought he might argue further, but something in my expression must have convinced him I was serious. He adjusted his cuffs, composing himself. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice eerily calm now. "Dad won't be pleased." "I don't live my life to please him anymore," I replied, moving to comfort Mia while keeping my eyes on my brother. "And neither does Mia." He left without another word, the door slamming behind him. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. Mia leaned into me, her small body still trembling. "Why does Uncle David hate my toys?" she asked in a small voice. I held her close, gently examining the red mark on her cheek where the toy had struck her. "He doesn't hate your toys, sweetheart. He's just angry about other things." "Is it because I'm messy?" she asked, looking around at her scattered toys. "No, honey. You're perfect exactly as you are." I helped her to her feet, brushing hair from her damp cheeks. "Let's clean up together, and then we'll have our lunch, okay?" She nodded, but her usual enthusiasm was gone. As we gathered her toys, I noticed that several were broken. Snapped limbs on action figures, a cracked castle tower. Small things, really, but to an 8-year-old's heart, they were casualties in a war she didn't understand. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from my father. "David tells me there was an incident. I expect you both at dinner tonight to discuss this behavior." I put the phone down without responding, focusing instead on helping Mia rebuild her toy city. We spent the afternoon together, fixing what could be fixed, finding creative solutions for the broken pieces. By late afternoon, she was smiling again, though more subdued than usual. I knew we wouldn't be going to my father's for dinner. That decision felt clear and right, even as I understood the consequences it might bring. Some boundaries needed to be drawn, even against family, especially against family, when they threatened the safe haven I'd worked so hard to create for my daughter. As evening approached, my phone began ringing incessantly. First David, then my father, then my sister Laura. I silenced it, focusing instead on making Mia's favorite dinner and helping her prepare for her school presentation on Monday. We read together before bed, her small body curled trustingly against mine, her breathing eventually deepening into sleep. Only then did I allow myself to cry, quiet tears that wouldn't wake her. Not tears of weakness, but of resolve. Tomorrow would bring consequences. My father's anger, possibly financial repercussions, family pressure. But watching Mia sleep, her face peaceful despite the day's trauma, I knew without doubt that I would weather whatever storm came. What I didn't know then was that the storm would arrive in the form of a court summons, or that my father, Judge William Montgomery, would use the full weight of his position to try to take my daughter away from me. I didn't know that David's incident would become a carefully crafted narrative about my fitness as a mother. I didn't know that I was about to face the fight of my life in my father's own courtroom. But that night, holding my sleeping daughter, I made a silent promise. No one would hurt her again. Not my brother, not my father, not anyone who confused control with love, or discipline with cruelty. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And when morning came, I was ready. The next morning I woke to 12 missed calls and a text from my sister Laura. "Dad's furious. He's talking about filing for emergency guardianship of Mia. This isn't a joke, Sarah." I stared at those words until they blurred, a cold weight settling in my stomach. My father wasn't just angry, he was mobilizing. And with his connections in the legal system, that was terrifying. "Mom?" Mia stood in my doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Are we in trouble?" Quote. I set my phone down and opened my arms to her. No, sweetheart. We're just facing a challenge, and we're going to face it together. She climbed onto the bed beside me, her small body warm against mine. Because of Uncle David. Partly, I said, choosing my words carefully. But mostly because grown-ups sometimes disagree about important things. Like how I should play with my toys? The innocent question broke my heart. No, honey. How you play is perfect. This is about grown-up disagreements that go back a long time. Before she could ask more questions, my phone rang again. Laura, I answered, keeping my voice calm for Mia's benefit. He's not bluffing, Sarah, Laura said without preamble. He's already spoken to Judge Harmon about filing emergency papers. Claims you're unstable, that you're raising Mia in an undisciplined environment detrimental to her development. That's absurd, I whispered, turning slightly away from Mia. David was the one who threw toys at her, who pushed her down. I know, Laura sighed. But Dad's spinning it differently. Says you provoked David, that you're turning Mia against the family. He's building a case, Sarah. I closed my eyes, fighting back the panic threatening to overwhelm me. What do I do? Get a lawyer, Laura said firmly. Today. Someone not afraid to go against Dad, and document everything. Mia's routine, her grades, any marks from yesterday. Dad's counting on you falling apart. After hanging up, I forced myself to move through our Sunday routine with manufactured normalcy. Pancakes for breakfast, checking Mia's homework, even a walk to the park. All while my mind raced through contingency plans and worst-case scenarios. When Mia was occupied with a drawing project, I slipped into the bathroom and photographed the bruise on her cheek from the toy David had thrown, along with the slight fingerprint marks on her arm where he'd grabbed her. I felt sick doing it, turning my daughter's injuries into evidence. But Laura was right. I needed to document everything. Monday morning brought what I'd been dreading, a courier at my door with legal papers. Emergency hearing scheduled for Wednesday morning, 9 a.m., courtroom 3B. Judge William Montgomery presiding. My own father would be hearing the case. He can't do that. Caroline Foster, the lawyer I'd frantically called, said later that afternoon in her cramped office downtown. It's a blatant conflict of interest. He'll say it's a family court matter, that he knows the situation best. I replied, having heard my father justify his overreach this way before. And who's going to stop him? He's been on the bench for 30 years. The other judges won't challenge him. Caroline, a former prosecutor turned family attorney with a reputation for fearlessness, studied the papers, her expression darkening. The allegations here are serious, Sarah. Unstable home environment, failure to provide proper structure and discipline, allowing Mia to engage in excessive fantasy play detrimental to academic development. She looked up. This is his actual concern? That your daughter plays with toys? My father believes children should be preparing for their futures at all times, I explained. When I was Mia's age, I had vocabulary drills and math workbooks instead of playtime. David and I weren't allowed toys that didn't have educational value. And your brother? These claims that you fabricated? Assault allegations against him? I pulled out my phone, showing her the photos I'd taken of Mia's bruises. He threw toys at her, grabbed her, pushed her down. Because her toys were messy. Caroline's jaw tightened. We'll file a counter motion, request a different judge, and we should consider filing assault charges against your brother. He'll say I'm being vindictive, I said, the familiar pattern of family dynamics playing out in my head. Dad will back him up, say I'm exaggerating to turn Mia against them. Then we need more than just your word. Caroline tapped her pen against the desk. Witnesses? Has Mia spoken to anyone about what happened? A teacher, a friend. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I thought about it. Her best friend Emma was coming over later that day. She might have mentioned it to her, or to Emma's mom Jennifer. And Mia's teacher, Ms. Winters, she's always encouraging the children to talk about their feelings. Good. We'll need statements from all of them. Caroline made notes in her legal pad. And what about this psychological evaluation they're requesting? It's a trap, I said immediately. Dad has connections with half the child psychologists in the state. they'll find exactly what he tells them to find. Caroline nodded grimly. We'll request an independent evaluation from a specialist of our choosing. In the meantime, keep Mia's routine as normal as possible. School, activities, playtime. Show she's thriving under your care. That evening, after Mia was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers. School reports showing her above-average performance, attendance records from her dance classes, photos of art projects, and science fair ribbons. Evidence that my daughter was happy, healthy, and well-adjusted despite not adhering to my father's rigid standards. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. Dad just called. Says he's giving you one last chance to be reasonable before the hearing. Wants you to agree to supervised visitation and parenting classes. I didn't respond. The implied threat was clear. Agree to his terms or face worse consequences in court. It was how he'd always operated, using his power to force compliance, calling it teaching responsibility when it was really about control. Tuesday morning, I dropped Mia at school with a tight hug and a reminder that I'd pick her up early for her doctor's appointment. Actually, a meeting with a child psychologist Caroline had recommended, someone who could provide an unbiased assessment before my father's chosen expert got involved. Is this because of Uncle David? Mia asked, her perceptiveness catching me off guard. I crouched to her level, meeting her eyes. Partly, yes, some grown-ups are concerned about what happened, and they want to make sure you're okay. Are they going to take me away? Her voice was small, frightened. Someone at school must have said something. Children absorbed more than we realized. No, I said firmly, though my heart clenched at the possibility. No one is taking you away from me, I promise. As I watched her walk into the school building, I wondered if I could keep that promise. My father had the power, the connections, the ability to paint me as unfit, simply because I refused to raise my daughter the way he believed children should be raised, like miniature adults, trained for success rather than allowed to experience childhood. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The psychologist Dr. Melissa Chen had a warm office filled with toys, art supplies, and comfortable furniture. She spent an hour with Mia while I waited anxiously outside, then invited me in for the last 15 minutes. Mia is a remarkably well-adjusted child, she told me afterward, while my daughter explored the small fish tank in the corner. Creative, articulate, secure in her attachments. She spoke openly about the incident with her uncle, and her account is consistent with what you described. Relief washed over me. So you don't see any issues with her development? Quite the opposite, Dr. Chen said. Her imaginative play is developmentally appropriate and healthy. Children process their experiences through play. It's how they make sense of the world, develop problem-solving skills, and build emotional resilience. Restricting that can actually hinder cognitive and emotional development. She handed me her preliminary report, promising a more detailed version before the hearing. This notes that Mia described feeling scared of her grandfather and uncle, but safe with you. That's significant, Sarah. Children are intuitive about who truly has their best interests at heart. Walking back to the car, Mia's hand in mine, I felt a surge of determination. My father might have the power, but I had the truth, and a daughter worth fighting for with everything I had. That night, as I tucked Mia into bed, she asked the question I'd been dreading. Do I have to see Grandpa tomorrow? I sat on the edge of her bed, choosing my words carefully. Yes, sweetheart. We have to go to the courthouse where Grandpa works. But I'll be with you the whole time, and Miss Caroline will be there too. Will Uncle David be there? Her voice trembled slightly. Probably, I admitted, but he won't hurt you again. I won't let anyone hurt you. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Grandpa scares me sometimes. He looks at me like I'm doing everything wrong. I know, I whispered, smoothing her hair. He looked at me that way too when I was little. Is that why you don't smile in the pictures at his house? The ones from when you were a kid? The observation startled me. She'd noticed something I thought I'd hidden well. The tension evident in every childhood photo, the forced smiles that never reached my eyes. Yes, I admitted. Growing up in Grandpa's house was difficult sometimes. Then why does he want me to live there? She asked, her child's logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. I didn't have a simple answer. How could I explain that my father's desire for control outweighed his concern for Mia's happiness? That in his mind, molding her according to his values was more important than respecting who she actually was? Grandpa thinks he knows what's best for everyone, I said finally. But part of being a grown-up is deciding for yourself what's really best. And I believe what's best for you is being allowed to be a child, to play, to imagine, to make messes sometimes. She seemed to consider this, then asked one more question that broke my heart. If Grandpa is a judge, doesn't that mean he gets to decide everything? No, sweetheart, I said firmly. Being a judge means he has to follow the rules and listen to the truth more carefully than anyone. And the truth is that you belong with me. I hoped I sounded more confident than I felt. Morning came too quickly. I dressed Mia in her favorite blue dress, comfortable but neat, and braided her hair the way she liked. For myself, I chose a conservative suit I hadn't worn since leaving my brief legal career 5 years ago. Looking in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The structured jacket and minimal makeup a costume from another life, one where I'd tried to become the daughter my father wanted. Caroline met us outside the courthouse, her confident stride and firm handshake steadying my nerves. Remember, she said quietly as we walked through the imposing doors. This is about Mia, not about your relationship with your father. Stay focused on her well-being, not old family grievances. I nodded, gripping Mia's hand a little tighter as we approached courtroom 3B. Outside the heavy wooden doors stood David, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, speaking in low tones with our father's longtime assistant, Margaret. He caught sight of us and straightened, his expression unreadable. Sarah, he acknowledged stiffly, then looked down at Mia. Something flickered across his face. Regret, perhaps, or simply discomfort. Hello, Mia. She pressed closer to my side, saying nothing. Margaret approached, her sensible heels clicking on the marble floor. Judge Montgomery would like to see you in his chambers before the hearing, Sarah. Alone. Caroline stepped forward. My client will not be having any ex parte communications with the judge, regardless of their family relationship. If Judge Montgomery has something to say, he can say it on the record. Margaret's lips thinned in disapproval, but she nodded curtly and disappeared through a side door. Inside the courtroom, I was surprised to see several familiar faces. Jennifer, Emma's mother, sitting with Ms. Winters from Mia's school, Dr. Chen, and in the back, my sister Laura, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. The social worker assigned to the case, a serious woman named Ms. Grantham, approached with a kind smile for Mia. The judge has requested that Mia wait in the children's room during the proceedings, she explained. There are books, games, and a counselor to keep her company. I knelt to Mia's level. Is that okay with you, sweetheart? I'll be right here the whole time. She looked uncertain but nodded bravely. Will you come get me when it's over? The very second, I promised, hugging her tightly before letting Ms. Grantham lead her away. Moments later, a side door opened, and my father entered, his black robes billowing around him, his silver hair impeccably styled, his expression severe as he took his place at the bench. He didn't look at me directly, but I felt his awareness of my presence, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the deliberate way he arranged his papers without glancing up. All rise, the bailiff called. The Honorable Judge William Montgomery, presiding in the matter of Montgomery v. Reynolds, petition for emergency guardianship. As I stood, I caught sight of David taking a seat, beside a sleek attorney I recognized as Peter Caldwell, my father's longtime friend and golf partner. The deck was stacked against me in every possible way, but then I felt Caroline's steady presence beside me, saw Laura's determined expression in the gallery, and remembered Dr. Chen's words about Mia, creative, articulate, secure in her attachments. My daughter was thriving not despite my parenting, but because of it. That truth had to count for something, even in my father's courtroom. The hearing began with Caldwell presenting my father's case, painting me as emotionally unstable, inconsistent with discipline, and fostering an environment that prioritized frivolous play over academic and social development. David testified about the incident, describing a scene so twisted from reality that I barely recognized it, claiming he'd merely tried to help tidy up when I became irrationally angry that Mia had fallen accidentally when running away from him. And in your assessment, Mr. Montgomery, Caldwell asked smoothly. Is your sister capable of providing the structure and guidance your niece needs? David hesitated, and for a moment, I thought I saw genuine conflict in his eyes. Then he glanced at our father, and his expression hardened. No, he said firmly. Sarah has always chosen the path of least resistance. She indulges Mia rather than preparing her for the real world. When it was Caroline's turn for cross-examination, she approached David with calm precision. Mr. Montgomery, could you explain these marks on Mia's arm and face? She handed him the photographs I'd taken. He barely glanced at them. As I said, she fell. Children get bruises all the time. Interesting, Caroline said. Because we have a statement from Emma Weber, Mia's friend, who says Mia told her that Uncle David threw toys and pushed me down. We also have Ms. Winters, Mia's teacher, who noticed the bruise on Monday and heard the same account. David's jaw tightened. Children exaggerate. Sarah has obviously been coaching her. Really? Then perhaps you can explain this. Caroline played a recording on her tablet, Mia's clear voice speaking to Dr. Chen, describing in a child's simple words exactly what had happened that Saturday. The courtroom fell silent. I watched my father's expression change almost imperceptibly, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a tightening around the mouth. He was hearing his granddaughter's voice describing his son's actions, and even he couldn't dismiss it entirely. Caroline called her witnesses next. Jennifer, who testified about Mia's consistent happiness and social adjustment. Ms. Winters, who brought examples of Mia's excellent schoolwork and spoke about her classroom participation. Dr. Chen, who presented her professional assessment of Mia as a well-adjusted child in a nurturing environment. Finally, it was my turn to testify. As I took the stand, I forced myself to look directly at my father for the first time. Our eyes met briefly before he looked down at his papers. But in that moment, I saw something unexpected: uncertainty. Caroline's questions were straightforward, allowing me to describe my parenting philosophy, Mia's routine, her development and interests. I spoke calmly about the incident with David, neither minimizing nor exaggerating what had happened. When Caldwell began his cross-examination, his tone was condescending, his questions designed to provoke an emotional response. Ms. Reynolds, isn't it true that you resent your father's success? That you deliberately choose to raise Mia contrary to his values out of spite? Objection, Caroline called. Argumentative and irrelevant. To my surprise, my father sustained the objection. Caldwell looked momentarily thrown, then regrouped. Let me rephrase. Ms. Reynolds, do you believe structure and discipline are important in raising a child? Yes, I answered honestly. But I believe discipline means teaching, not punishment. Structure means providing security, not rigid control. My father raised me to believe that childhood was merely preparation for adulthood. I'm raising Mia to understand that childhood has value in itself, that play, imagination, and joy are not distractions from learning, but essential parts of it. I could feel my father watching me intently now, though his expression remained impassive. Something was shifting in the courtroom's atmosphere, a tension that wasn't there before. Caldwell tried another approach. Your daughter spends hours playing with toys, engaging in fantasy worlds rather than productive activities. Don't you worry this will leave her unprepared for the competitive world she'll face? I took a deep breath. My daughter reads above grade level, excels in mathematics, and has exceptional social skills. She also believes in magic, creates elaborate stories, and sometimes leaves her toys scattered across the floor. I believe these things are connected, not contradictory. Her imagination fuels her learning. Her creativity enhances her problem-solving. I won't sacrifice one for the other. When all testimony concluded, my father called a brief recess before giving his ruling. Caroline squeezed my hand. You did well, she whispered. Whatever happens, remember we can appeal. Those 15 minutes of waiting were the longest of my life. I sat stiffly on the wooden bench, watching the clock tick forward, trying not to imagine a future where Mia lived under my father's roof, subject to the same rigid expectations that had shaped my childhood. When court resumed, my father seemed different somehow, his posture less rigid, his expression thoughtful rather than severe. He shuffled his papers, adjusted his glasses, and finally spoke. "This case," he began slowly, "presents unique challenges, not least because of my personal connection to all parties involved. I've considered recusing myself, but as this is an emergency petition and time is of the essence, I will proceed with my ruling." He paused, looking directly at me for the first time since the hearing began. The court's primary concern in any custody matter is the best interest of the child. Not the parents' wishes, not family tradition, not even what I personally might believe is best. The law requires me to consider the child's physical and emotional well-being above all else. My heart pounded as he continued. "I have heard testimony today that paints very different pictures of the same situation. I have heard expert opinions and witnessed evidence that cannot be easily dismissed. And I have listened to the voice of Mia herself, describing events from her perspective." He removed his glasses, setting them carefully on the bench. "Throughout my career, I have emphasized the importance of discipline, structure, and preparation for adulthood. I still believe these values have merit. However," the courtroom was utterly silent, waiting. "However, I am forced to acknowledge that my son's actions, as described by multiple witnesses and by Mia herself, demonstrated not discipline but a loss of control. Not structure but chaos. Not guidance but intimidation." David shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My father didn't look at him as he continued. "This court cannot condone such behavior, regardless of intent or family relationship. The evidence clearly shows that Mia is thriving in her current environment, despite, or perhaps because of, parenting choices that differ from those I might have made." He put his glasses back on, straightening to his full height. "Therefore, the petition for emergency guardianship is denied. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing David Montgomery from having unsupervised contact with Mia Reynolds until he completes an anger management program and parenting classes." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father, Judge William Montgomery, was ruling against his own son, against himself in many ways. "Additionally," he continued, his voice softer now, "I am recusing myself from any further proceedings in this matter, as it has become evident that my personal relationship with the parties prevents the objectivity this case deserves." He brought down his gavel with finality. Court is adjourned. As people began to move around me, I sat frozen, unable to process what had just happened. Carolyn was smiling, Laura was hurrying toward me, and David was storming out a side door, Caldwell rushing after him. And my father was watching me from the bench with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger, not defeat, but something more complex. Something that looked almost like respect. Ms. Grantham appeared with Mia, who ran to me immediately. I held her tightly, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and letting the reality sink in. We had won. Against all odds, against the full weight of my father's authority, we had won. Or perhaps, in some unexpected way, we all had. As we stepped out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sunlight, Mia's hand felt small but secure in mine. The tension that had been coiled in my chest for days was finally beginning to unwind, replaced by a cautious relief. We had survived the storm, at least this first violent squall of it. "Is it over now?" Mia asked, squinting up at me against the sun. I crouched down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "The court part is over, yes. And you get to stay with me, just like always." Her smile bloomed slowly, like a flower unfurling after rain. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" Caroline, who was walking beside us, laughed. "I think that's an excellent legal strategy," she said with a wink. We were halfway down the courthouse steps when I heard my name called. Turning, I saw my father standing at the top of the stairs, his judicial robes gone, looking suddenly older in his regular suit. "Go ahead to the car," I told Caroline and Mia quietly. "I'll be there in a minute." I walked back up a few steps, stopping with enough distance between us to feel safe, but close enough to talk without shouting. My father looked uncharacteristically uncertain, his hands clasped tightly before him. "Sarah," he began, then paused as if searching for words, a rare occurrence for a man who had always known exactly what to say. "That was difficult." "Yes," I agreed simply. He glanced past me to where Mia waited by Caroline's car. "I want you to know that my ruling wasn't personal. I followed the law as I saw it. I studied him, this man who had shaped so much of my life through his rigid expectations and unyielding standards. Would you have made the same ruling if you weren't personally involved? If it was just another case on your docket?" He considered the question with the careful deliberation that had made him respected on the bench. "I'd like to think so," he said finally. "But the truth is," hearing Mia's voice describing what happened, "seeing those photographs," he shook his head slightly, "it forced me to see things differently. Things like your son's behavior? Or things like my parenting?" "Both," he admitted. "David was wrong. What he did was—" He struggled visibly. "It was something I might have justified in the past as discipline. But seeing it through Mia's eyes, through the evidence presented, it wasn't discipline. It was anger. Control. The admission hung between us, weighted with decades of family history. And your parenting?" he continued after a moment. "I still don't agree with all of it. But Dr. Chen's testimony was compelling. Mia is thriving. Perhaps there's more than one right way to raise a child." It was as close to an apology as I'd ever heard from him, as near to validation as he could offer. Part of me wanted to demand more. Explicit acknowledgement of the harm his rigid parenting had caused, recognition of the pressure he'd placed on all his children to conform to his impossible standards. But looking at him now, I saw something I'd never noticed before: vulnerability beneath the authority, uncertainty behind the certainty. "Thank you for following the law," I said finally, "for seeing the evidence clearly, despite your own beliefs." He nodded once, a short, sharp movement. "David will appeal," he warned. "He's always been stubborn. Like his father." I couldn't help adding, though without malice. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Like all of us, perhaps. We stood in silence for a moment longer, the gap between us both physical and emotional, too wide to cross in a single conversation, but perhaps not as unbridgeable as I'd once thought. "Mia has a dance recital next weekend," I said suddenly, surprising myself. "If you'd like to come, just to watch, not to judge?" He finished for me, and this time the almost smile was more visible. "I'd like that." I nodded and turned to go, then paused. "And Dad? If you do come, please just watch her dance. Don't critique her form or timing or outfit. Just enjoy seeing your granddaughter be happy." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a release of tension I hadn't even realized was there. "I'll try," he said quietly. "I'm learning that's not always as easy as it sounds." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That evening, after we'd celebrated with ice cream and Mia had returned to playing with her toys, more carefully arranged than usual, I noticed with a pang. I sat on the porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The events of the day kept replaying in my mind: the tense courtroom, David's twisted testimony, my father's unexpected ruling. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "Just checked on Dad. He's okay but quiet. David's not speaking to either of us. You holding up all right?" I typed back, "We're good. Mia's playing. Dad's coming to her dance recital next weekend." 3 dots appeared immediately then. "What? Did I miss something major after I left?" I smiled, imagining her shocked expression. "Just a small crack in the Montgomery family armor. I'll call you tomorrow." Setting my phone aside, I closed my eyes and listened to the distant sounds of Mia humming to herself through the open window, the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. a neighbor's wind chimes tinkling softly. The peace felt fragile, but precious. "Mom?" Mia's voice called from inside. "Can you come see what I made?" I found her in the living room, surrounded by a new creation. Not the scattered city of toys from before, but something more deliberate. Action figures and dolls arranged in what appeared to be a courtroom scene, with a Lego platform serving as the judge's bench and smaller figures seated in neat rows. "It's Grandpa's courtroom," she explained, pointing to a gray-haired figure positioned behind the bench. "But see?" Everyone's smiling now. I looked closer and saw that she'd turned all the small plastic faces toward the camera, each one bearing a drawn-on smile. Even the judge figure had a tiny, upturned mouth sketched in erasable marker. "That's beautiful, honey," I said, my throat suddenly tight. "And look," she continued, shifting to reveal another section of her creation. "This is our house. See? There's my room with all my toys, and here's the kitchen where we make pancakes. And this is the porch swing where you sit when you're thinking." The detailed recreation of our home, right down to the tiny paper books she'd made for our bookshelves, brought tears to my eyes. This was how she saw our life together. Detailed, ordered in its own way, filled with the things that mattered to her. "Do you like it?" she asked, searching my face. "I love it," I told her honestly. "You've captured everything important." She beamed, then grew serious. "I was scared today, when Ms. Grantham took me to that room with the other kids." "I know, sweetheart, I was scared too." "But you weren't scared when you talked to Grandpa in the big room, were you?" "You looked brave." I thought about how to answer truthfully. "I was scared on the inside," I admitted. "But sometimes being brave doesn't mean not feeling scared. It means doing what's right, even when you are scared." She considered this, arranging a tiny toy cat on the porch of our Lego house. "Like when I had to get my shots, but I didn't cry?" "Exactly like that." "Grandpa looks scared too," she observed, surprising me with her perceptiveness. "When he was listening to the recording of me talking to Dr. Chen, his face got all tight like this." She demonstrated, scrunching her features into an exaggerated grimace. I hadn't noticed that, too focused on controlling my own anxiety. But children often saw things adults missed. "I think Grandpa had to make a very hard decision today," I said carefully. "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, even for grown-ups, especially for grown-ups." She nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something she already knew. "Is that why Uncle David was so angry? Because doing the right thing is hard for him?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I chose my words with care, not wanting to demonize David but also not excusing his behavior. Uncle David is used to getting his way. When things don't go how he expects, he sometimes reacts with anger, instead of thinking about what's really right. "Like when he threw my toys," she said matter-of-factly. "Yes, exactly like that." She was quiet for a moment, rearranging some of the figures in her courtroom scene. "I don't think I want to see Uncle David for a while," she said finally. "You don't have to," I assured her. The judge, "Grandpa," said Uncle David can't see you unless there's another grown-up there too, and only after he takes some special classes to help him with his anger." "Good," she said decisively, removing a figure I now realized represented David from the courtroom entirely. We spent the rest of the evening playing together, then reading stories until Mia fell asleep, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. I stood in her doorway watching her for a long moment, marveling at her resilience, her capacity for processing difficult experiences through play, her simple wisdom that sometimes put my adult complications to shame. The next morning brought a semblance of normalcy: breakfast, school drop-off, my own classes to teach. But everything felt slightly shifted, as if the world had tilted on its axis and was still settling into its new orientation. My students seemed to sense the change, watching me with curious eyes as I moved through the lesson with more energy than usual, a newfound confidence coloring my interactions. You seem different today, Ms. Reynolds, observed Zach, one of my more perceptive fifth graders, as he lingered after class. Do I? I smiled, arranging papers on my desk. Yeah, kind of. Stronger? Like a superhero who just discovered their powers. His earnest face made me laugh. That's a nice way of putting it, I told him. I think I just remembered something important that I'd forgotten for a while. What's that? I considered how to express it in terms a 10-year-old would understand. That standing up for what's right, especially standing up for someone you love, gives you a kind of strength you didn't know you had. He nodded seriously. Like when my big sister told those kids to stop making fun of my stutter last year. She was scary strong that day. Exactly like that, I agreed, touched by the comparison. Your sister sounds amazing. She is, he said, with the absolute certainty of childhood. She says being strong isn't about being the biggest or loudest. It's about knowing when something matters enough to fight for it. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought as he waved goodbye. The wisdom we try so hard to teach our children often circles back to remind us of what we already know, but have forgotten. That afternoon, as I graded papers in my classroom during prep period, Caroline called with an update. David filed his appeal this morning, as expected, she reported. But there's something interesting. Your father has officially recused himself from any further involvement in the case, citing personal conflict. He's recommended Judge Elena Martinez to take over. I set down my red pen, surprised. Martinez? She's known for being fair but tough. Not exactly a pushover. Exactly, Carolyn sounded pleased. It's a good sign, Sarah. He could have recommended someone more likely to favor David's position, but Martinez will look at the evidence objectively, and with your father's ruling as precedent. So what happens now? We wait for the appeal hearing to be scheduled. Continue documenting Mia's progress, her adjustment. Keep everything as stable and positive as possible. She paused. How are you holding up, really? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on Mia, on the legal proceedings, on maintaining normalcy, that I hadn't really checked in with myself. I'm okay, I said slowly. Better than I expected, actually. There's something clarifying about having to fight for what matters most. All the small anxieties, the everyday worries, they fall away when you're focused on the essential. That's good, Caroline said warmly. Just remember to breathe occasionally. This isn't over yet. After we hung up, I sat staring out the classroom window at the playground where my students were having recess. Children ran, jumped, swung, their movements free and joyful. I thought about my father's rigid approach to childhood, all structure and discipline, with play viewed as a distraction from more important pursuits. Had he ever watched children like this and seen not wasted time but necessary development? Had he ever allowed himself or his own children that freedom? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Margaret, your father's assistant. He asked me to inquire about the details for Mia's dance recital. Time, location, appropriate attire. I smiled, imagining my father dictating that message, too proud or uncertain to ask me directly but making the effort nonetheless. I replied with the information, adding, casual dress is fine. It's a children's recital, not a formal event. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared before the response came. He also asks if there's something specific Mia might like as a gift. Not a bribe, he emphasized, just a normal grandfather gesture. The message made me laugh aloud, startling a student who was dropping off a late assignment. I composed myself and typed back, she loves art supplies, colored pencils, sketchbooks. Nothing expensive or elaborate needed. When school ended, I picked Mia up from her after-school program, noticing how she ran to me with unrestrained enthusiasm, unconcerned with who might be watching, so different from how I'd been taught to comport myself as a child, always aware of appearances, of judgment. Mom, I made something for Grandpa, she announced, pulling a folded paper from her backpack as we walked to the car. I opened it to find a carefully drawn picture of a man in what appeared to be judge's robes, sitting not on a bench, but on a park bench beside a small girl with pigtails. Above them, In Mia's careful handwriting, me and Grandpa watching birds. It's beautiful, I told her, genuinely touched. What made you think of drawing Grandpa today? She shrugged, buckling her seatbelt. Ms. Winters had us draw people who surprised us, and Grandpa surprised me by being fair even though he was mad at you. Out of the mouths of babes, indeed. That evening, as we prepared dinner together, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Laura standing there, a bottle of wine in one hand and a tote bag in the other. I thought you might need this, she said, holding up the wine. And Mia might like these. She reached into the tote and pulled out several new chapter books. Aunt Laura, Mia called, running to hug her. Did you bring the one about the girl detective? Of course I did, Laura laughed, handing over the books. Go see what you think while I talk to your mom. As Mia settled on the couch with her new treasures, Laura followed me into the kitchen, uncorking the wine and pouring 2 generous glasses. So, she said, leaning against the counter. Dad's going to a dance recital, David's not speaking to anyone, and the Montgomery family dynamic is in complete upheaval. Just another week, right? I accepted the glass she offered, taking a grateful sip. It's been transformative. Laura's expression grew serious. I went to see David today. He's not backing down, Sarah. He sees Dad's ruling as a betrayal, and he's convinced himself that you've manipulated everyone. The judge, the psychologist, even Mia. I set my glass down, a chill running through me. He can't really believe that. He needs to, Laura said simply. Otherwise, he'd have to face the truth about himself, about what he did. David's never been good at self-reflection. None of us were taught to be, I pointed out. Admitting fault wasn't exactly encouraged in our household. Laura acknowledged this with a tilt of her head. True. But this is different. He's escalating, Sarah. Talking about hiring private investigators to monitor your parenting, gathering evidence of instability. That's ridiculous, I protested. I'm a teacher, for God's sake. I've been nothing but stable. I know that. But David's desperate, and desperate people can be dangerous. She hesitated. There's something else. I found him looking through old family photos yesterday at Dad's house, specifically ones of you as a child. He was muttering about patterns of behavior and history repeating itself. My stomach twisted. David had always been our father's favorite, the one who embraced the Montgomery way without question. He had also been the one who most frequently reported my childhood infractions, reading fiction when I should have been studying, daydreaming during lectures, creating secret art projects under my bed. He's looking for ammunition, I realized aloud, trying to prove I was always defiant, always problematic. Yes, Laura confirmed. And he seems to think he can use Dad's own parenting decisions against you somehow, show that you needed the structure and discipline you're now denying Mia. I took another sip of wine, forcing myself to think strategically rather than emotionally. He's missing the point entirely. I'm not against structure or discipline. I'm against controlling a child's every moment, denying them joy and creativity in the name of achievement. I know, Laura said softly, but David doesn't see the difference. To him, it's all the same. Either you're raising Mia the Montgomery way, or you're doing it wrong. We were interrupted by Mia calling from the living room, excitement in her voice. Mom, this book has a girl who solves mysteries about art. She's just like me. I'll be right there, honey, I called back, then turned to Laura. What should I do about David? She considered for a moment. Be vigilant but not paranoid. Document everything just in case. And she hesitated. Maybe talk to Dad. Really talk to him about the past, about how his parenting affected you. He might be more receptive now, after what happened in court. The suggestion surprised me. You think he'd listen? I think he's questioning things he's never questioned before, Laura said carefully, and that creates an opening, if you're willing to step through it. Later that night, after Mia was asleep and Laura had gone home, I sat at my desk looking through my own collection of childhood photographs. Unlike the formal portraits my father kept, these were candid shots. Me at the beach building sandcastles during a rare family vacation, Laura and me making snow angels against our father's orders, My mother reading to me before she died. Small moments of joy stolen in a childhood otherwise dominated by achievement and expectations. Looking at them now, I realized that what I was giving Mia wasn't the absence of structure, but a different kind. One built around nurturing her whole self, not just the parts that could achieve or produce or perform. On impulse, I picked up my phone and composed a text to my father. "Thank you for agreeing to come to Mia's recital. It means more than you know. If you're willing, I'd like to talk before then. Just us, about things we've never really discussed." I hit send before I could overthink it, then sat back, exhaling slowly. The reply came faster than I expected. "My office, tomorrow, 2 p.m. I'll clear my schedule." The next afternoon, I found myself once again climbing the courthouse steps, but this time with a different kind of apprehension. This wasn't about legal battles or emergency hearings. This was about something more fundamental, the chance to finally speak honestly with my father about the legacy of his parenting, the impact of his expectations, and the possibility of a different relationship moving forward. As I approached his chambers, Margaret nodded to me with newfound respect, or at least less obvious disdain. "He's waiting for you," she said, gesturing to the heavy wooden door. My father stood as I entered, motioning to a chair across from his desk. He seemed uncertain, almost awkward, a stark contrast to his usual commanding presence. "Sarah?" he acknowledged, sitting only after I did. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for making time," I replied, noticing the photograph on his desk. An old one, of all of us, before my mother died, when David and Laura and I were still small and unformed, our paths not yet diverged. He followed my gaze. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," he admitted. "About the choices I made after your mother died. About the father I became." It was a more direct opening than I'd expected, and it momentarily left me speechless. My father, Judge William Montgomery, was not a man who typically invited reflection or criticism. "I was thinking about that too," I said carefully. "About how different our house felt after Mom was gone. How everything became about achievement, about living up to the Montgomery name." He didn't immediately defend himself as I expected. Instead, he folded his hands on the desk and asked, "Were you ever happy, Sarah? Truly happy during those years?" The question caught me off guard with its simplicity, its unexpected vulnerability. I considered deflecting, softening the truth, but something in his expression, an openness I'd rarely seen, made me answer honestly. "No," I said quietly, "I wasn't. I was trying so hard to be what you wanted that I lost sight of who I actually was. Every day felt like a test I was failing." He flinched slightly but nodded. "And David? Laura?" "Laura adapted better than I did. She found ways to meet your expectations while keeping parts of herself private. David?" I hesitated. "David became what you wanted. He embraced it completely. I think that's why he's so angry now. Because in his mind, he did everything right, exactly as you taught us, and suddenly the rules seem to be changing." My father was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "I thought I was preparing you all for success," he finally said. "After your mother died, I was terrified. Of failing you as a parent, of letting you grow up soft in a hard world. I convinced myself that discipline and achievement were the only things that mattered, that if I could make you strong enough, successful enough, you'd never suffer the way." He trailed off. "The way you did when Mom died." I finished for him. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement. "I wanted to protect you from pain by making you invulnerable to it. I see now that was misguided." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from him, and it loosened something tight in my chest. "I'm not raising Mia the way you raised us," I said plainly. "Not because I want to rebel or because I think everything you did was wrong, but because I want her childhood to have room for joy, for imagination, for making mistakes without feeling like a failure." "Like the childhood you didn't have," he observed, his voice surprisingly free of judgment. "Yes," I admitted, "but also because I've seen as a teacher how children learn and grow. Structure and discipline matter, but so does play. So does feeling secure and being loved exactly as you are, not just for what you achieve." He was quiet again, considering. The psychologist, Dr. Chen, said something similar in her testimony, about imaginative play being developmental, not frivolous. It is, I confirmed. When Mia creates stories with her toys, she's processing emotions, practicing empathy, developing language skills. When she builds with blocks, she's learning physics, spatial reasoning, problem solving. It looks like just playing to an outside observer, but there's complex learning happening. My father leaned back slightly, a thoughtful expression replacing his usual sternness. I never thought of it that way, he admitted. In my mind, there was work, and there was play, and only one of them mattered. That's how you were raised, I acknowledged, and you were trying to give us what you thought was best. Yes, he said, meeting my eyes directly. But I'm beginning to understand that what I thought was best may not have been what you needed, what any of you needed. The admission hung between us, not quite healing the past, but creating an opening for something new to grow. We talked for another hour, about specific memories, about my mother, about the different paths his children had taken. It wasn't always comfortable, but it felt necessary, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. As our time drew to a close, he asked a question that surprised me with its directness. Is it too late, Sarah, to have a different relationship with Mia? With you? I thought about it honestly. I don't think it's too late, I said finally. Different, yes. Changed by the past, absolutely. But not too late for something better. He nodded, a hint of relief in his expression. I'd like that. To try, at least. As I stood to leave, he reached into his desk drawer and handed me a thin file folder. You should have this, he said, for the upcoming appeal hearing with David. I opened it to find photocopies of childhood records, report cards, evaluation notes, teacher comments. All mine, all highlighting creativity, imagination, excessive reading, and other traits that had been deemed problematic under his parenting philosophy. He's going to try to use these against you, my father explained, to show that you were difficult and needed structure. But look at the actual comments, not just his interpretation. I scanned the pages and saw what he meant. Yes, teachers had noted my daydreaming, my preference for art and stories over math drills, but they had also described me as insightful, empathetic, a natural leader in creative projects. Qualities that had been dismissed as distractions then, but that I now recognized as strengths in my adult life, in my teaching, in my parenting. Thank you, I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. He nodded once, formally, but there was warmth in his eyes that had been absent for as long as I could remember. I'll see you at the recital, he said. To watch Mia dance, not to critique her form. As I left the courthouse, the afternoon sun warm on my face, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't expected from this meeting. Not instant resolution or perfect understanding, but the beginning of something honest. A relationship built on truth rather than expectation, on acceptance rather than demand. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. Emma wants to know if Mia can come for a sleepover Friday night. Says they're planning an epic toy adventure, whatever that means. I smiled, typing back an enthusiastic yes. The everyday normal of childhood continuing despite courtrooms and family drama. Resilient, adaptable, joyful in its simplicity. Just like Mia herself. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect early autumn day that seemed designed specifically for children's dance recitals. I stood in Mia's doorway, watching her sleep for a moment before gently waking her. Today's the big day, I whispered, brushing hair from her forehead. She blinked awake slowly, then sat up with sudden excitement. My dance! And Grandpa's coming? The genuine enthusiasm in her voice caught me by surprise. Despite everything, she seemed genuinely happy about my father's attendance, perhaps because it represented something new and hopeful rather than a continuation of old tensions. Yes, he is, I confirmed, sitting on the edge of her bed. And so is Aunt Laura, and Emma and her mom, and Ms. Winters said she might stop by too. But not Uncle David, Mia clarified, her expression serious. No, not Uncle David. The restraining order remained in effect, though Caroline had informed me that he was complying with the court-mandated anger management classes, grudgingly, but complying nonetheless. Mia nodded, seemingly satisfied, then threw off her covers with renewed energy. I need to practice one more time before breakfast. I laughed as she jumped out of bed and immediately launched into her routine, arms gracefully extending as she twirled across her bedroom floor, narrowly avoiding stepping on a stuffed animal. The pure joy of movement, the unself-conscious delight in her own body's capabilities. These were gifts I wanted her to keep forever, uncomplicated by the critical voice that had haunted my own childhood. While Mia practiced, I prepared breakfast chocolate chip pancakes, a special recital day tradition we'd established when she first started dance classes 2 years ago. As I flipped the pancakes, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. What is the appropriate protocol for dance recitals? Flowers? Applause timing? I smiled at his formal phrasing, the judge even in casual family interactions, and typed back, "Small bouquet is fine if you'd like. Applaud after each performance. No need to stand or cheer unless you genuinely feel moved to do so." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then, "Understood. Thank you." After breakfast, we went through the familiar routine of preparing for the recital, securing Mia's hair in the required bun, applying the minimal makeup allowed for 8-year-olds, just a touch of blush and clear lip gloss, and carefully packing her costume for the drive to the community center where the recital would be held. "Do you think Grandpa will like my dance?" Mia asked as I navigated through Saturday morning traffic. I considered how to answer honestly. "I think he might not fully understand dance the way you do," I said carefully. "But I think he'll be proud of your hard work and dedication. Those are things he values very much." She seemed to consider this. "Ms. Kendra says dance isn't just about the steps. It's about telling a story with your body." "That's beautiful," I agreed. "And very true." "Maybe if Grandpa watches closely, he'll see my story," she concluded with simple confidence. At the community center, the atmosphere was controlled chaos. Excited children in various stages of costume, harried dance instructors making last-minute adjustments, parents juggling cameras and flower bouquets. I helped Mia find her class group and settle in, then went to save seats in the already filling auditorium. Laura was already there, waving from the middle section where she'd claimed a row of seats. "Front and center for the star," she announced as I joined her. "I've got Dad's seat saved too. He texted that he's parking now." "He texted you too?" I laughed. "He asked me about recital protocol this morning." "Of course he did." Laura rolled her eyes affectionately. "Everything's a procedural question for him. He called me last night to ask what level of enthusiasm is appropriate for a grandparent at these events." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The mental image of my father researching appropriate grandparent behavior made me smile. For all his faults, he was trying, making an effort in a way I couldn't have imagined just weeks ago. Jennifer and Emma arrived next, followed by Ms. Winters, who brought a handmade card signed by all of Mia's classmates. "They wanted her to know they're cheering her on," she explained. As the seats around us filled, I kept glancing toward the entrance. Finally, just 5 minutes before the scheduled start time, my father appeared in the doorway. He stood there for a moment, scanning the crowd with a slightly lost expression, so different from his commanding courtroom presence. Laura waved until he spotted us, then made his way over with careful dignity. He was dressed more casually than I'd seen him in years, khaki pants and a blue button-down shirt instead of his usual suit, and carried a small bouquet of pink roses. "Am I late?" he asked as he took the seat Laura had saved beside me. "Right on time," I assured him. "The program should start in a few minutes." He nodded, placing the flowers carefully on his lap. "I wasn't sure what kind to get," he said, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "The florist suggested these." "They're perfect," I told him. "Pink is her favorite color." We sat in slightly awkward silence until the lights dimmed and the dance director stepped onto the stage to welcome everyone. As she explained the program order, I could feel my father beside me, sitting ramrod straight as if this were a formal hearing rather than a children's recital. "You can relax, Dad," I whispered. "This isn't a court proceeding." He gave me a quick sideways glance, then consciously adjusted his posture, leaning back slightly in his seat. It was such a small thing, but it spoke volumes about his effort to step outside his comfortable formality. The first few dance groups performed, tiny ballerinas stumbling adorably through simple routines, slightly older children managing more coordinated movements. The audience applauded warmly after each performance, and I noticed my father joining in, his expression thoughtful as he watched each group. When it was time for Mia's class, I felt myself tensing slightly. They were performing a more complex routine than she'd done before, and she'd been nervous about a particular sequence of turns. Laura squeezed my hand reassuringly as the curtain opened to reveal Mia's group of 8-year-olds in their pale blue costumes. The music began, a gentle piano piece that gradually built in tempo, and the dancers moved into their formation. Mia was in the second row, her expression concentrated but joyful as she followed the choreography. When the challenging turn sequence arrived, she hesitated for just a fraction of a second before executing it beautifully, a smile breaking across her face as she completed the movement. Beside me, I heard my father's intake of breath. I glanced over to see him watching intently, his eyes fixed on Mia with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between wonder and recognition. As the dance continued, Mia seemed to grow more confident, her movements becoming more fluid, more expressive. She wasn't the most technically perfect dancer in the group, but there was a natural joy in her performance that was captivating. When the music reached its crescendo, her face was alight with the pure pleasure of movement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The dance ended with the girls in a circle, arms raised in a final pose. The audience erupted in applause, many people standing. Without hesitation, my father rose to his feet, clapping with genuine enthusiasm, his usual reserve momentarily forgotten. As the dancers took their bows, Mia spotted us in the audience. Her face lit up when she saw her grandfather standing and applauding, and she gave a special little wave in our direction before following her group off stage. She was wonderful, my father said as we sat back down, his voice carrying an emotion I rarely heard from him. Truly wonderful. Yes, she was, I agreed, touched by his sincerity. The rest of the recital passed in a blur of performances, but I kept returning to the image of my father, standing to applaud Mia, the genuine pride in his expression, so different from the measured approval he'd dispensed throughout my childhood. After the final performance, we made our way to the reception area where the dancers would join their families. Mia came bounding toward us, still in her costume, her face flushed with excitement. "Mom, did you see? I did all the turns right," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around my waist. "You are amazing, sweetheart," I told her, hugging her back. "Absolutely beautiful." She turned to my father then, suddenly a little shy. "Did you like it, Grandpa?" For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, the articulate judge rendered speechless by an 8-year-old in a dance costume. Then he crouched down to her level, an action so uncharacteristic that I stared in surprise. "Mia," he said seriously, "your dancing told a story, just like you wanted it to. I saw every word of it." Her eyes widened. "You did? What story did you see?" He considered the question with the same careful thought he gave to legal matters. "I saw a story about joy," he said finally. "About finding freedom in movement. About being exactly who you are, without apology." Mia's smile could have lit the entire room. "That's exactly right," she whispered, then impulsively threw her arms around his neck. My father froze for just a second before awkwardly returning the hug, patting her back gently. Over Mia's shoulder, his eyes met mine, filled with a complex mixture of emotions: regret for what had been missing in our relationship, gratitude for this second chance with his granddaughter. Laura appeared beside me, slipping her arm through mine. "Well, that's something I never thought I'd see," she murmured. Judge William Montgomery brought to his knees by a dance recital. "Life is full of surprises," I replied, watching as my father presented Mia with the pink roses, which she accepted with exaggerated formality before dissolving into giggles. Jennifer approached with Emma, both girls immediately launching into animated conversation about the performances. As they chattered excitedly, my father straightened and stepped back, returning to a more comfortable observational role. "Your daughter is quite talented," he said to me, his tone more measured now but still warm. "And more importantly, she's happy, confident." "That's what I've always wanted for her," I acknowledged. "To feel secure enough to express herself, to explore who she is without fear of disapproval. Something shifted in his expression, a flash of old pain quickly controlled. Things I failed to provide for you. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. We're breaking that cycle, Dad. That's what matters now. Before he could respond, Ms. Winters joined our group, complimenting Mia on her performance and introducing herself to my father. Judge Montgomery. Mia's told us so much about her grandfather, the judge. We're studying the judicial system next month. Perhaps you'd consider visiting our class? The invitation clearly caught him off guard, but after a moment's consideration, he nodded. I'd be honored, assuming my schedule permits. Mia bounced with excitement. Can you wear your judge robe, Grandpa, and bring your gavel? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, small but genuine. I believe that could be arranged. As the reception continued around us, I found myself observing the scene with a sense of wonder. My daughter surrounded by people who celebrated her exactly as she was. My father making tentative steps toward a different kind of relationship. My sister watching it all with the same disbelieving joy I felt. None of it erased the past. None of it guaranteed a perfect future. But in that moment, it felt like healing. Not the instant kind found in fairy tales, but the real, messy, gradual kind that comes from honest confrontation and genuine effort. Later that afternoon, after Mia had changed out of her costume and we'd all gone for celebratory ice cream, my father pulled me aside as we were leaving the parlor. I'd like to show you something, he said. If you and Mia have time. Curious. I agreed, and we followed his car to a part of town I rarely visited, an older neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained historic homes. He parked in front of a stately Victorian with a wide front porch and led us up the walkway. This was your mother's childhood home, he explained as we stood looking up at the house. My in-laws sold it after they moved to Florida, but I always remembered how much Elizabeth loved growing up here. I stared at the house, trying to imagine my mother as a young girl running through its rooms, playing in the yard that stretched behind it. I didn't know this was still here, I admitted. You never brought us by. No, he acknowledged. After she died, it was too painful. But I drove past recently and noticed it was for sale. He hesitated. I've been thinking about downsizing. My house has more space than I need now. The implications of what he was saying slowly dawned on me. Dad, are you considering buying Mom's old house? He nodded, surprising me with his openness. I've made an offer. It's not about living in the past, but about reconnecting with something important that got lost. Elizabeth was different from me. More creative, more intuitive. She understood things about raising children that I never grasped until recently. Like the importance of play, I suggested. Of imagination. Yes. His gaze moved from the house to Mia, who was exploring the front garden with delight. She would have approved of how you're raising Mia. She would have seen what I couldn't. That you're giving her what she needs, not what some arbitrary standard demands. The acknowledgement brought tears to my eyes. Validation I hadn't realized I still needed. Thank you for saying that. He cleared his throat, emotion making him uncomfortable despite his efforts. The house has a room that would make an excellent art studio, and the backyard is spacious enough for creative activities. A playhouse? I suggested, smiling through my tears. Maybe even a swing set? Perhaps, he conceded with mock seriousness. If properly constructed and safely maintained. Mia ran back to us then, her face alight with discovery. Mom! There's a huge tree in the backyard. It would be perfect for a treehouse. My father and I exchanged glances, his questioning, mine encouraging. Would you like to see the backyard, Mia? He asked carefully. I believe the realtor left the gate unlocked. As Mia raced toward the side gate, my father turned to me once more. I can't change the past, Sarah. I can't undo the ways I failed you and your siblings, but perhaps I can create a different kind of future. A place where Mia can visit her grandfather without feeling like she's entering a courthouse. I'd like that, I told him honestly. For both of you. 3 weeks later, as November painted the trees in brilliant reds and golds, we gathered in the courtroom once more for the appeal hearing. David sat with his attorney, his posture rigid, his expression closed. He hadn't spoken to any of us since the initial ruling, channeling all his communication through legal representatives. Judge Martinez reviewed the case thoroughly, giving both sides ample opportunity to present their arguments. David's attorney emphasized the importance of traditional discipline and structure, presenting statistics about children raised in permissive environments. Caroline countered with expert testimony about developmentally appropriate parenting approaches, highlighting Mia's continued academic and social success. When it came time for character witnesses, I was surprised to see my father take the stand, not as a judge, but as a grandfather with relevant observations to share. Your Honor, he began formally, I've had the opportunity to observe my granddaughter in various settings over the past month. At school events, at her dance recital, in casual family interactions. What I've witnessed is a child who is thriving, emotionally secure, intellectually curious, and socially well-adjusted. David's face darkened as our father continued. As someone who raised 3 children with a very different philosophy, one that prioritized achievement over emotional well-being, structure over creativity, I can now recognize the limitations of that approach. My daughter Sarah has chosen a different path, one that honors her child's individual needs and developmental stages while still providing appropriate boundaries. Judge Martinez leaned forward. And in your professional opinion as a family court judge, do you believe this parenting approach is in the child's best interest? My father met her gaze steadily. Without question. What I once mistook for permissiveness, I now recognize as responsive parenting. Mia is not lacking discipline. She simply experiences it in forms I failed to value. Natural consequences, clear explanations, consistent boundaries delivered with respect rather than intimidation. His testimony carried particular weight coming from someone known for his traditional views, and I could see its impact on Judge Martinez's expression. When she delivered her ruling upholding the original decision and extending the restraining order against David for 6 more months, I felt a complex mixture of relief and sadness. Relief for Mia's security, sadness for the continued fracture in our family. Outside the courtroom, David brushed past without acknowledgement, his attorney trailing behind. My father watched him go with an expression of regret. He'll need time, he said quietly. This challenges everything he believes about family, about authority. Will he ever accept it? I asked. My father considered the question with his characteristic thoughtfulness. That depends on what's more important to him, being right, or being part of Mia's life. It's a choice he'll have to make for himself. As we walked down the courthouse steps together, Laura, my father, and I, Mia waited by Caroline's car, kicking at fallen leaves with childish abandon. Spotting us, she waved excitedly. Is everything okay now? She called. I exchanged glances with my father, seeing in his eyes the same understanding I felt. That okay was a complicated concept. That family healing wasn't a destination but a journey with both progress and setbacks. Yes, sweetheart, I called back. Everything's okay. And in that moment, it was true. Not perfect, not resolved in every detail, but fundamentally okay in ways that mattered most. Mia was safe, loved, free to develop according to her own nature, rather than someone else's rigid expectations. My relationship with my father was evolving, finding new ground based on mutual respect rather than authority and submission. Even David had the opportunity to grow, to reconsider, to choose connection over control, if he could find the courage to do so. That evening, as Mia and I worked together on a new art project at the kitchen table, a diorama of a courtroom scene, complete with tiny paper figures representing everyone who had been part of our journey, she asked a question that caught me by surprise. Mom, do you think Uncle David will ever come see my toys again? I set down the scissors I'd been using, considering how to answer honestly without burdening her. I don't know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have a hard time changing how they think about things, even when they should. She nodded, carefully placing a small paper figure in a judge's robe at the front of the diorama. Grandpa changed his mind. Maybe Uncle David will too. Maybe, I agreed, touched by her capacity for hope. People can surprise us. Like when Grandpa stood up at my dance recital, she said, smiling at the memory. Or when he said he's going to build a treehouse with me. Exactly like that. She worked in silence for a few moments, then said, I'm going to make a toy for Uncle David. For when he's ready to play nicely. The simple wisdom in her approach moved me deeply, neither holding a grudge nor ignoring boundaries, but leaving space for growth, for reconciliation on healthier terms. It was a lesson many adults never mastered. That's a beautiful idea, I told her. What kind of toy will you make? A judge's gavel, she decided, already reaching for more construction paper. But a soft one, made of fabric and stuffing. So it can't hurt anyone. As winter gave way to spring, our new family patterns took shape. Sunday dinners at my father's new home, the purchase of my mother's childhood house had gone through, weekly playdates with Emma, dance classes continuing with enthusiasm. David remained distant, though Laura reported that he was continuing his court-mandated therapy and showing small signs of reflection. My father's transformation was more visible, still formal in many ways, still structured in his thinking, but increasingly open to new perspectives. He installed bookshelves in what had once been my mother's childhood bedroom, filling them with a carefully curated collection of children's literature for Mia's visits. He consulted with me about appropriate toys, learning to value items that stimulated imagination rather than just education. Most surprisingly, he began to share stories about my mother that he'd rarely spoken of before, how she'd insisted on reading fiction alongside law texts during their early marriage, how she'd filled their first apartment with art and color despite his preference for minimalism, how she'd championed play-based learning for their children before her illness took her from us. She would be proud of you, he told me one evening as we watched Mia exploring the backyard of his new home. You're raising Mia with the balance I lost sight of after Elizabeth died. The balance between structure and freedom, between achievement and joy. The acknowledgement healed something deep within me, not completely, but significantly. The path forward wasn't perfect or always smooth, but it was authentic, built on truth rather than pretense, on genuine acceptance rather than conditional approval. On Mia's 9th birthday, we celebrated in my father's backyard, now transformed with the promised treehouse, built to exacting safety standards, of course, and a small garden Mia had helped plant. Friends from school came, along with Laura and her husband, Jennifer and Emma, Ms. Winters, and other important figures in our lives. As Mia was opening her presents, a car pulled up outside. The gate opened slowly to reveal David, standing awkwardly with a gift-wrapped box, his expression uncertain. A hush fell over the gathering. My father stepped forward first, extending a hand to his son. I'm glad you came, he said simply. David hesitated, then accepted the handshake. I've been thinking, he said, his voice rougher than usual, about a lot of things. Mia approached them cautiously, stopping a few feet away. Hi, Uncle David, she said. He knelt to her level, careful to maintain appropriate distance. Happy birthday, Mia. I brought you something. If that's okay. She looked to me for guidance, and I nodded slightly, moving closer to provide security, while respecting her ability to navigate this moment. She accepted the package with a polite, thank you, and carefully unwrapped it, to reveal a wooden box with her name carved on the lid. It's for your special toys, David explained, watching her reaction. The ones that tell stories. I made it myself. Mia ran her fingers over the carved letters, then opened the box to reveal velvet-lined compartments perfectly sized for her favorite action figures. It's beautiful, she said honestly. I've been learning, David said, glancing up at me, about play, about imagination, about different ways to be family. He turned back to Mia. I'm sorry about what happened before. I was wrong. The simple acknowledgement, so rare from Annie Montgomery, hung in the air like a gift more precious than any wrapped package. Mia considered it with her characteristic thoughtfulness, then nodded. Thank you, she said. I made something for you too. Mom, can I get it? I retrieved the soft fabric gavel Mia had crafted months ago and kept waiting for this moment. She presented it to David with solemn ceremony. "It's a judge's hammer," she explained, "but soft, so it can make decisions without hurting anyone." David accepted it with visible emotion, turning the handmade object over in his hands. "That's very wise, Mia." The tension in the gathering gradually eased as the party continued, David remaining somewhat apart but present, observing more than participating but making the effort nonetheless. It wasn't instant reconciliation. That would take more time, more work, more growth on all sides. But it was a beginning. Later, as twilight softened the edges of the day and guests began to depart, I found myself sitting on the porch steps with my father and Laura, watching Mia showing Emma how to arrange her toys in the new wooden box. "She's remarkable," my father said, his voice warm with genuine admiration, forgiving without forgetting, setting boundaries without building walls. "She's had good examples," Laura pointed out, bumping my shoulder affectionately, "of resilience, of standing up for what matters." I watched my daughter, struck by the truth of what they were saying. Mia was navigating complex family dynamics with a wisdom beyond her years, finding her way through a situation no child should have to face. But in doing so, she was developing strengths that would serve her throughout life. Discernment without cynicism, forgiveness without naivete, joy despite difficulty. "We're all learning from her," I acknowledged. "Even David, I think." My father nodded, his expression reflective. "It takes courage to question the patterns you've accepted your whole life. To admit there might be better ways than the ones you've defended." The observation applied to all of us in different ways. To David's rigid adherence to our father's values, to my own rebellion against them, to my father's reconsideration of his life's philosophy. We were all works in progress, imperfect but evolving. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Mia came running over with a jar of fireflies she and Emma had carefully collected. "Look," she exclaimed, holding up the glass so we could see the gentle blinking lights within. "They're like tiny stars you can hold." My father leaned forward, examining the insects with genuine interest. "Did you know fireflies produce light through a chemical reaction in their bodies?" he asked, slipping automatically into educational mode. But before I could intervene, he caught himself and added, "It's quite magical, isn't it? Nature's own light show." Mia beamed at him, pleased by this acknowledgement of wonder alongside fact. "We're going to watch them for a little while, then let them go," she explained. "Because beautiful things should be free." As she ran back to join Emma, my father's eyes met mine over the gathering darkness, filled with a new understanding that transcended words. In that moment, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, and there would be many, we had found a foundation stronger than the one we'd started with: truth, acceptance, and the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the greatest lessons come from the smallest teachers. The next morning, as Mia arranged her birthday presents in her room, carefully placing each toy in its new wooden home, she looked up at me with unexpected seriousness. "Mom," she said, "do you think people can change forever, or do they sometimes go back to how they were before?" I sat beside her on the rug, considering how to answer with the honesty she deserved. "I think real change is possible," I said finally, "but it takes time and effort. It's not like flipping a switch. It's more like planting a garden. You have to tend it every day, even when it's difficult." She nodded, absorbing this. "Like Grandpa learning to watch me dance without telling me how to do it better?" "Exactly like that," I agreed, smiling at her perfect example. "Or like Uncle David learning that there are different ways to be strong. Or like you learning to talk to Grandpa again, even though he made you sad when you were little," she added perceptively. I blinked, surprised by her insight. "Yes," I acknowledged. "That's part of my garden, too." She placed the last of her figurines in the box, arranging them in a circle as if in conversation with each other. "I think our whole family is growing a garden," she decided, "with different flowers that weren't there before." The image was so perfect, so beautifully capturing the transformation we were experiencing, that I felt tears spring to my eyes. That's exactly right, sweetheart. She closed the wooden box lid gently, running her fingers over her carved name. Even if Uncle David gets angry again or Grandpa forgets sometimes, we don't have to throw away the whole garden, do we? No, I assured her. We just keep tending the parts that are growing, and we protect ourselves from the thorns while they're still there. She nodded, satisfied with this approach, then jumped up with the resilience of childhood. Can we go to the park now? I want to try the new kite Grandpa gave me. As we headed out into the bright spring day, Kite tucked under Mia's arm, I reflected on the journey we'd traveled, from fear and control to a tenuous but growing freedom. The legal battles were behind us, but the deeper work of family healing continued daily, in small moments and significant ones, in boundaries maintained and bridges carefully built. What mattered most wasn't perfection but progress, not an idealized vision of family but an authentic one, where mistakes could be acknowledged, growth celebrated, and differences respected, where a child could play freely, developing according to her own nature rather than someone else's rigid template, where adults could learn from their errors rather than defending them, could evolve rather than calcify in their positions. At the park, I watched Mia run with her kite, face lifted to the sky as the colorful fabric caught the wind and soared upward. She had needed no instructions, no formal training, just the freedom to try, to fail, to adjust, to succeed through her own efforts. It struck me then that this was the essence of what I'd been fighting for all along, not just Mia's physical safety or legal custody, but her right to unfold naturally, to discover her own capacities without unnecessary constraints. To be seen and celebrated for exactly who she was, not molded into someone else's vision of who she should be. My phone buzzed with a message from my father. Treehouse repairs complete. Safety railing installed as discussed. Mia's weekend visit still convenient for you? I smiled at the mix of the old and new in his communication. The careful attention to safety, the formal phrasing, but also the underlying excitement about spending time with his granddaughter, doing things he'd never done with his own children. Yes, she's looking forward to it, I replied, bringing her new art supplies to decorate the inside. His response came quickly. Excellent. I've covered the floor with protective material. Creative expression should not be impeded by concern for pristine surfaces. I laughed aloud at this characteristic blend of structure and newfound flexibility. So perfectly my father, yet so different from the man who had raised me with no tolerance for mess or spontaneity. People could indeed change, I reflected as Mia ran back to me, cheeks flushed with excitement as her kite danced against the blue sky. Not instantly, not completely, not without occasional backsliding, but meaningfully, genuinely, especially when motivated by love. And in the end, wasn't that the most important lesson for all of us? That love, when freed from the constraints of control and expectation, could transform even the most rigid hearts, could heal even the deepest family wounds, could allow us all to grow into better versions of ourselves, like flowers turning naturally toward the sun, finding their own perfect shape and freedom. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.